Welcome back. The Greek debt deal has been hailed by many, but the IMF and several other commentators have suggested it is flawed and not sufficient to get Greece out of trouble. We cross now to our Seapoint studio to speak to economist Chris Hart. Good evening, Chris.
Good evening, Gunther.
For starters, Christine Lagarde has said that this deal is actually not good enough for Greece. So, firstly, why does she say that? And why would she then tag the IMF along with the bailout?
Yeah, I think it's interesting to see different camps. There's some people saying, well, you can see Greece as an example where austerity doesn't work. And yet, for austerity to be anti-austerity, the other side of that coin is somebody's going to lend Greece money. And the people who are lining up to lend Greece money are only willing to do so if there's going to be reforms. Greece is not the easiest place in the European Union to do business and set up investment. They really are over-indebted. The whole deal actually means how much more money are we going to lend Greece, and it's still to pay pensions, and it's still to pay civil service salaries, which means that if this deal lasts for 3 years, if it holds together for 3 years, in 3 years the crisis is back. And so, when you say austerity doesn't work, I have the view that it's more that austerity is a policy consequence, not a choice. And we're seeing this unfold because Greece had the referendum. They said no to austerity. And they realized by saying no to austerity means that we're not going to accept the conditions of the loans. If the loans don't come, well, the other side of that means they actually go into much deeper austerity. And that's basically the reality that they actually have to face. And so basically the debts that they get given is helping them to achieve a much softer landing than if they were just to go off debt cold turkey. But it's got to be put back onto a sustainable path. The trouble is financing, institutions like the IMF would be happy to give Greece more money, right? But it's never given, all right? It's a case of the money that Greece is getting is largely to keep the loans that they've already got current. And that is a classic sign that they're in a debt trap. And so to actually turn that around, the IMF would say, well, to pay them back, we'd need higher taxes. And I think Greece needs to look the other way. They need to say, how can we make ourselves one of the more attractive countries in Europe to invest and to do business. And this is what the Irish maintained through all their crisis. They at least maintained the formula of their previous success. And they, to a large extent, are busy climbing out of their crisis. Still a long way to go, but to a certain extent, they've actually shown that you can actually have austerity and still get your economy to work, because at least they're not making the mistakes that the Greeks are. And unfortunately, institutions like the IMF and the ECB, etc., they want their loans kept current, so they would say raise taxes so that the Greek government can keep servicing those debts. And yet the economy needs lower taxes and less regulation.
Chris, now what is this business that Lagarde went on about 50% haircut or what she called debt forgiveness? It's the same thing, essentially.
No, it's basically saying, let's, cut the debt in half. In other words, let's, instead of wait for Greece to default and get the 50% cut or even more, let's cut it straight away and let's see if Greece can recover from that. It still doesn't help if Greece needs to borrow money for current things like salaries and pensions. So these things effectively ultimately have to be cut. We need to appreciate these are things that have been overpromised years ago, decades ago, and this is where Greece is coming to a problem. A lot of Europe is in the same position. They have to effectively borrow money to meet welfare gaps where their tax bases are already overstretched. So the countries are becoming rapacious, in terms of attacking to try and get the extra tax euro and tax dollar into the kitties. just to keep things going. And so Greece is really a forerunner of what is going to come through a lot of Europe.
Well, I suppose this deal that they had, half a loaf is better than none. But let's move on to China. Now, this week they released GDP figures, and these were greeted with quite a bit of skepticism by analysts. Why?
Well, the thing is, when it comes to China, they've got a couple of bubbles bursting. We need to appreciate that Greece and China are completely separate crises, if you like, but they have the same origin, too much debt. And debt levels in China have quadrupled since 2008, and their bubbles are actually bursting. So the property bubble burst, and it quite clearly has done into last year, and this year the equity bubble has been bursting. The authorities have tried to work against it, but when you look at corroborating evidence across the economy, things like imports, freight volumes, electricity production, etc., it would suggest that the Chinese economy actually may well be close to stagnation, never mind 7% growth. And that, of course, is concerning. You can also see it in other in commodity prices. That the commodity prices in things like copper and that type of thing is not really reflecting a Chinese economy that is growing at 7%. And it may well be overstated, but of course it's difficult to actually get into the actual details of the numbers.
Chris, is it not a little bit easy to say, well, number manipulation may be taking place because, after all, they did manipulate the equity market quite a bit to stop this rot?
Exactly, but remember there was manipulation to get it up in the first place because of the speculative capital flows. When you're actually trying to reflate your economy using a tsunami of debt, which is what the Chinese have done, you will get unusual things. So if you actually have a look at the conduct of monetary policy over the last few years, it almost looks like they're running around like a chicken without a head. They need to cool it down, and then they cool it down, the bubble bursts, then they need to actually cut again to uplift, to try and contain the effects of the bubble. Then suddenly something else goes into bubble, so they need to hike rates, and then that also starts to burst. So they cut. More recently, they've just been cutting, and that suggests that the problems are, in a sense, could be spinning out of control.
Chris, thank you for your time. That's Chris Hart, Chief Strategist at Investment Solutions. Now,